Now the question is, how do we define inclusive growth, and are the policies in place, both fiscal and monetary, really directed towards bridging the gap of inequality in Nigeria?
You see, there's a contradiction here. The contradiction is you are operating something that is destructive, and they turn around and say, we want to construct a just world. If you want to construct a just world, you begin with a just foundation, because you cannot build a great economy on faulty foundation. It's not even Nigeria economy alone. It is neoliberal economic policy makers have no place for the poor. If you read their policy, although they can tell you, yeah, you didn't read it very well. If you read their policy mindset or policy philosophy, it is hand everything to the private hands and everybody will take care of themselves.
Wait, so is it a bad thing to have the private sector, have more control and just have the government overseeing how these sectors are being run?
In 1929 to 1933, America witnessed a Great Depression, and most Americans, about 40% of Americans, lined up as beggars because the system excluded them. Until Franklin Roosevelt came in and said, look, we must have capitalism with a human face. And he came up with social safety nets. Although before then, Germany had something in the early 20th century, but it was more organized and more enforced. You cannot leave the business of the people's well-being in the hands of profiteers, in the hands of profit maximizers, in the hands of monopolists. It cannot happen.
But it's not monopoly in this case. I mean, we have the private sector who are coming in to share, to try to reduce the amount of business that government is supposed to be handling, because according to what we hear and according to what we know, the government is not in the business of handling the economy. It's supposed to be like an overseer of what the private sector is supposed to be doing. In other words, what you're saying is that that's what we should be having right now.
Let me tell you, there's a practical example that we all see, China. You see, when I talk this way, I don't talk because I hate the neoliberals or I'm a socialist to the core. But what I'm trying to say, look at China. China has a socialist market system where the private and state sector work hand in hand, so that where the state discovered that the private sector cannot handle without the urgency to maximize return on investment, the state comes in to cool it down a bit.
But that's not what is happening here,
no,
is it?
Exactly, because look at power sector. I continue to say that power sector cannot be in hands of private sector alone. China today produces 1,141,000 megawatts of power, ahead of the United States. It did it within 20 years.
But then, if you remember, Mr.
Yes.
I have to cut you here.
Yes.
You remember that when the government decided that they were going to unbundle the successor companies,
yes,
we know that it agreed that there were still some aspects it was still going to have a control
yes.
over. It wasn't going to entirely leave it to the private sector.
That is transmission.
So, in other words, you're making it sound as if it's been left entirely to the private sector.
No, I'm not saying that, but also I'm saying that. How can we generate 100,000 megawatts? There's no private sector in this country who will just throw in that money with all the risks involved. You understand what I'm saying? Because whether you like it or not, anybody coming to Nigeria is looking at what will be the risk level in this country after 2015. You understand what I'm saying? Now, if federal government has borrowed extensively, because power is the game changer, borrowed extensively to get up to 100,000 megawatts. Now, government can gradually sell off the power plants, because the problem is generation in the first place. If you don't have generate, you can't transmit, you can't distribute. So what are we talking about? Government, individuals cannot build nuclear plants because it requires economic diplomacy. A lot of economic diplomacy for it to be built. No individual can have it. There will be a lot of negotiation between Nigeria and those nations that have nuclear energy that don't want countries like us to have it. We have to assure them it's going to be for power generation. And no individual can do it. In countries like China, they are using areas like they're building dams, very serious dams, and dams are capital intensive. You understand what I'm saying? We cannot expect individuals to build dams that will cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. You understand what I mean? And it requires a lot of logistics, and because water fluctuation can affect the generation. So all these are the things government wants to borrow money to, so that it will free the economy problem of power generation, and can actually privatize over a period of, or commercialize over a period of time.
Mr. Ewerebe, we're still saying the same thing.
Yes.
I mean, because the government has said it has not entirely left the power sector to the private, the power industry to the private
What is
sector.
the policy of government on generation? I want to see the policy right now. Government has hands up generation. But the president said it here. The president said we are in charge of transmission. That's what he said. But even in the transmission you are talking about, they are not investing massively in transmission. So I don't know how we want to run this big economy by just not investing, because that's my concern. Look, this country has what it takes to borrow about $300 billion using our oil as strategic collateral, and use this money to fix our infrastructure, so that the cost of doing business in Nigeria will be drastically reduced. Because if we don't reduce the cost of doing business in Nigeria, no foreign investor will come and invest in Nigeria. But you know that. So what are we talking about here? We must massively invest in power, so that anybody doing business in Nigeria, we see that the cost of power have been taken care of. Forget about the monetary policy thing, like making Naira overvalued and things like that, because we want to keep Naira stable and things like that. But look at America spending over $85 billion on monthly basis on quantitative easing. What is quantitative easing? It's the devaluation of the dollar. It is injecting a new dollar into the system, so that there will be enough liquidity, so that it will reduce interest rate to minimum. And now people can borrow and do long-time projects and long-time businesses. But in this country, we are running the economy based on textbooks. But people like us have seen the textbook for a long period of time, and we know that the textbook we read at MIT and Harvard and Stanford, when you graduate, they take you to specific places. They also take that place where they will not teach you the real economics. The real economics they need to apply. But then we should carry this economics as they say that if you do A, you get B, and we want our country, we start implementing it. And that's what put us where we are today.
Mr.
We must invent our own models. And our models will look like the one the Chinese former leader then said. It doesn't matter whether the cat is white or black, so long as it catches mice.
Well, Mr. Ewerebe, that's
Yes.
been an interesting analogy, but thank you very much. This is not the end of the conversation. I'm sure you know that we'll still talk more about this, but that's what we can take for today. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I've been speaking with developmental economist Odelim Ewerebe, and we've been looking at some sectors in the Nigeria economy, and as he said, we should as much as possible take what we've learned out of the textbook and practicalize them. And so that's the program for today, the Thursday edition of Business Morning. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Harriet Agbemi.